And there's so much in these various treatments of exposure and also of ACT. When you think about all these practices, we'll kind of go into if you have, we won't say favorite because that's hard, but a
Mm.
particular practice or a skill or a tool that you found are, very useful for the clients you work with, even maybe useful in your own life. If you'd be willing to kind of share that and maybe even teach that or share aspects of that, so people can get kind of a more experiential sense of how this might be presented, let's say, in therapy, if they were to work with you or a therapist who does this type of work.
Sure. Yeah. So the main concept I think of, I shouldn't say that I think of a main concept that can really have a dramatic effect when I see people make this shift.
Hmm.
Um, the more technical phrase for it, we call it diffusion. And it's not important that anyone remembers that what that term is, but what it talks about is being able to engage in behavior, so be able to do things in our lives uh, in ways that doesn't match up or doesn't have to match up with what we're feeling internally. So said differently, of the like what's going on inside, any urges we have or thoughts that we have, doesn't have to dictate what we do with our actions. And it can sound like such a simple concept, but it's one that when I see people make that shift, that it is not simple in practice by any means.
Yeah.
But it's one that really can allow a lot of freedom in how we live our lives once we get that as a solid process. Um, it's not just one that I find to be one of my favorites, but it also, like, the research bears this out. Like, especially within OCD, we do see that that is a really important process for people to be able to separate out that internal world with their behavior.
Hmm.
So yeah, if you want, I can walk you through a bit about what that could look like. We could
Yeah,
do a
that
little
would be
practice with it.
that'd be awesome. Yeah.
Okay. So again, I'm going to go with something simple but not easy here. If you're interested, Ryan, you can do this with me, and
Sure.
anyone listening can practice this as well. What I'll have you try is to pause for a moment, and you're welcome to close your eyes if that would be helpful. And we're going to practice this process of doing something different than what our bodies are suggesting we do. So I want you to check in with your body to just see if you are getting any signals that are letting you know that your body wants you to do something. So you might notice an itch that's letting you know that you should scratch it. You might notice that there's some discomfort in your body that's saying that you need to move. Or if you're driving and listening right now, it might be that there's a suggestion that you need to hold your body in a certain way, or hold the steering wheel in a certain way. And for a moment, I want you to practice not doing the thing that your body is telling you. And our job right now is simply to feel that urge. So for myself, I'm having an itch above my left eye, right on my eyebrow. I want you to really focus in on that urge and that experience. Notice if your mind is giving you any sort of thoughts about it. If your attention drifts away from it, simply come back to the urge. Notice what it's up to right now. You might even try to notice the shape of the sensation. If it's changing or if it's constant. See if you can let that be just as it is. And then when you're done or when you've had enough of that practice, you can go ahead and open your eyes. You can choose to scratch the itch if you'd like, or do the action if you choose, or you can continue to let it be. Do you want to hear my thoughts more on it, Brian, or do you
I
want to
do, and
try
we can talk. I didn't
it?
want to call scene to the
Okay.
exercise too early. I definitely have thoughts on that, but yeah, let's hear your experience if you're willing.
Yeah. So this is one, like I said, it's a simple but not easy practice. And I'll often have people try this out as a way to really think of it as like building up a muscle of this concept. In that, like, if itch scratching is not a thing, or scratching an itch is not a thing that you're needing to work on, like, that's totally fine. But what we all just did in that moment is practice the skill of doing something different than what our body said to do. And that is something that we can apply in so many different areas of our lives. And that, like, anywhere that we practice that is going to be beneficial in building that up. So, um, yeah, I encourage people to really think of that as something that we can do at any moment to really build on that.
Yes, and so my experience, you had that itch that was coming up for me. There was an itch. It was kind of in my right temple. And then I was wondering if this was going to happen before during my clinical day. I had my window open and there's a fly in the office
God, I
here.
love it.
And so I had my eyes closed and it landed on my left ear
Oh
and
no.
super loud. And then I don't know if it picked up on the video, but like to my head and to over here. And the thoughts my mind was coming up with, like, really? It's happening now? And of course, an urge to itch, but like, of course, this would happen during this interview with Kate.
Mm,
But just to notice those, right? These are
yeah.
thoughts, they arise, these itch sensations, and being curious about, well, our mind's telling us it's going to intensify, it's going to get worse. So taking that more just curious, open stance about, well, what is this going to be like? Anyway, it was really fun for me to do that. And of course, so thank you to that fly for sure.
Wonderful. I was just going to say that fly gave you a really wonderful opportunity to practice here.
That's right. What an opportunity that we say. So with
Yeah.
this practice, and I agree, this is when we talk about diffusion, the term is not as important as what this is signaling, but that we don't need to identify with the next thought or the next urge that comes up. To scratch is one thing in your practice, the populations, individuals you tend to work with. This one particular tool and kind of core principle, how have you seen this kind of impact the lives, the treatment progress of the people that you work with clinically? Do some examples kind of come to mind of what you've actually seen with people making this shift that you
Mm,
talked about?
yeah. Yeah, the general stance or process that I see happen for people is that there's a shift to seeing that the world inside of us, the stuff that's going on internally, just um, it like 95% of it is meaningless. That, like, there is just a freedom that can come from that. And so when I see people, like, in my work, like, be able to sit through a panic attack and be able to come out on the other side of that and see themselves as unharmed and really stronger for it, of like being through something that didn't get to change their behavior.
Hmm.
That like one instance of something like that can just really shift how someone perceives themselves and what they are capable of. And I'd say I see that in lots of different ways of people, like for someone who fears that they may harm a family member by
Hmm.
stabbing them. So it's a common thing that comes up as an obsession within OCD, that you might have an experience of like being able to make dinner next to your child and be sitting there like cutting with a knife while having this thought of like, oh, you could stab your child. Like that is it can be a very distressing and painful experience for someone to have.
Hmm.
And when they start to learn like, oh, I can have this thought, this doesn't have to be influencing my behavior at all, it does feel just like a fly that landed on your head and then decided to go away at some point.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I really do think that people can learn how strong they are in these types of practices, which is really an honor to get to see that in my clients.
Hmm. And with that, it's I mean, the freedom that is my own experience too of putting this into practice is, well, these urges, these thoughts are coming up. And for so much of my life, it was, well, I should or shouldn't be having this,
Mm,
right? In that case, a good parent doesn't think about stabbing
mm,
their child,
yeah.
right? And so we kind of take on, what does this say about me that this thought or this urge is coming up? And to your point, to be able just to, well, do we actually need to do anything with that
Mm,
urge, right? There's an itch there, but you see that in OCD, these kind of examples. It is just such a sense of freedom to be able to drop the perceived urgency of, I don't know, do I need to do anything with this thought? Do I need to do anything with this emotion? And sometimes it's helpful to do that as a signal, but like you're saying, 95% of the time, maybe, or who knows, but that's often the experiment to run though, right? Is this helpful in the moment? If so, awesome. That's
mm,
information. But if not, I don't know. What's it like to just cut up that tomato or something next to your kiddo?
yeah.
What's coming to my mind is, have you had people who are just like, I'm not willing. That doesn't,
Mm,
in other words, those barriers you slam up against. How do you tend to deal with that when people like, that sounds good, but there's no way in hell I'm doing that.
yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. All the time.
Right.
Understandably so. Like
Yep.
I don't like doing the things that I'm scared of either. Um, yeah. There are other components to ACT that
Yeah.
really, I think, help bring that up and or help work on that concept. And it, it's like this stuff doesn't happen in a vacuum. Like I would not want to ask someone to do this type of practice. I really think just for the fun of it,
Hmm.
because we are working on things that at least initially feel extremely intense and difficult, and it is not easy to work with these and continue living your life with these experiences. So I always want there to be the bigger picture, like why are we doing this? And what is the point of cutting that tomato next to your kid? Like, if the person says like, I don't care if I can cook dinner next to my kid or have a knife next to my kid, like I don't know that we're gonna set that as a practice. But if they're saying like, yeah, I want to be able to like teach my kid how to cook, and in order to do that, I need them to be near me while I have a knife in my hand or while there is a knife nearby. So what we really focus on is saying, okay, what is the life that you want to be living? And then let's set some action goals around that. And
Hmm.
then in the meanwhile, you might have some stuff happening inside your mind or in your body that's telling you to not do that. And that's when we want to do this practice to say, like, I don't know that I need to attend to that signal that my body is sending me right now or that my mind is sending me. Instead, I'm going to attend to what I want to be doing with my life. And I want to be spending this time with my kid here.
Yeah. And so really important if, people like, well, how does this benefit me to not scratch an itch or to deal with a fly? Well, that's the question, right? What is the
Yeah.
life you want to live? And then if this is something getting in the way, is it important enough for you to be able to tolerate some of that distress and to have this new learning happen? So if somebody were to work with you, that's a big part of it, right? Is figuring out the life they want to live, what's getting in the way, and then using some of these tools in a flexible way to help them continue that progress, right?
Yeah.
So I
Absolutely.
I alluded in my life, this isn't new to me, and this is why I love a lot of these treatments, is it's not just theoretical, these are tools, and you don't need to believe any of it. It's try it out, and in my own life, it's been so useful and life-changing. I'm curious about with you, we can say diffusion or we can talk about values, but with these treatments, ACT, exposure, whatever it is, what have you noticed in your own life in terms of how this stuff has, played a role for you?
Yeah. Honestly, I'd say this is a concept I use on a daily basis. And it's one that, yeah, that so many of my decisions every day are from this stance of how do I want to be living my life rather than what my body is telling me to do. Like regularly, my mind and body are not telling me things that are helpful. So, uh, yeah, I can think of lots of examples. I'd say the biggest one that comes to mind is I have a decent fear of the ocean.
Mm,
Decent meaning like it's a fairly large one in my life. And I happen to be married to someone who just loves the ocean and loves surfing and being in it. And it's so important to him to be like to spend time with me in the ocean.
mm,
And so you can imagine how that might not work out to well if I were to just follow that fear every time. If I were to
mhm,
say, like, you know what, like that is not something I want to do. That's going to be uncomfortable. I'm going to drown. There's scary things under the water. Like all of the stuff my mind can throw at me there. And
mhm.
sometimes I do follow that stuff. And I'd say for people listening to understand that what we're talking about here, it's not that we have to be perfect at this and do this every time, but being aware of the decision that we're making and how we're making it. And so, yeah, sometimes I do avoid. I feel like, today's not the day that I'm going to be able to like do this thing that's important to me. And other times I've like gotten in there and I am in the midst of a wave like smashing me in the face and like honestly even talking about it right now my heart just like starts beating faster like thinking of that experience, but all through that process I'm like I am here doing this because this is so important to my spouse and like I really do want to be here with him, and it is an experience that I really do enjoy when I do that with him. But it's one that I really have to practice feeling and embracing the stuff that comes with it, and not listening to my mind when it is just like, get out of here. This is so not okay. But I'd say I even use it at like a smaller and smaller scale decisions. Well, actually, this isn't a small scale one, but like Brian, you're aware of this based on my response to your request to do this podcast. So like that my response to you was, yeah, this makes me feel like vomiting doing this, and I'd love to. Like there's
That's right.
um, like public speaking or being recorded while speaking is something that just naturally makes me anxious, and
Mhm.
so yeah, I saw your email. It was like, oh no, I'm not doing that, is what my mind just said. And then I decided, like, actually, no, I do really want to do this. And so I practiced doing something different than what my initial reaction was. So yeah,
If
it's all over in my life.
if you weren't gonna raise that, I was gonna bring that up because that came
Great.
that just immediately came to my mind of like, "Oh, that's what you responded was,
Yeah.
yeah, this I feel like vomiting, and absolutely, I will do it."
Yeah.
And I don't know if you found this, but the more and more I practice this particular skill, right, of diffusion, also there's acceptance, there's values, all this stuff together that ACT, kind of combines. I've come to view those signals when they come up as that's like a salient signal of this actually, there's a reason there's this reaction. And oftentimes I found that the things that terrify me the most tend to be some of the things that when I truly step back and think about the life I want to live, what's
Mm.
meaningful to me, how I want to be remembered. So I can kind of use that discomfort as this might be pointing me exactly to what otherwise I would want to be doing. And so how do we move forward? I don't know if you've noticed that too, but I definitely have.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we learn those signals for ourselves of what are those tendencies that we have that
Mhm.
like yeah, I think we talked about it in the email of that like vomit barometer where it's just like, oh, okay, that's a sign that there's something here that like really does matter to me. And not all the time. And that's one of the things I would caution people against is yeah, sometimes that vomit barometer is actually saying like, no, this is dangerous. You do need to stay away from this. Don't do this thing.
Yep.
And that is part of this practice, is learning, like, when is it useful to attend and follow what our minds and bodies are telling us, and when is it useful to not do so. And my suggestion from that is to always do that based on what the effect of that is. So for surfing with my husband, like, that the effect of that is like, yeah, I haven't been eaten, I am like, I didn't drown, I felt pretty uncomfortable when water went up my nose, and I got to spend a really wonderful quality time with my husband. And to me, like, the effect of taking that action made sense for me to not listen to my fears. If I
Mhm.
was like getting bitten by sharks every single time I went out there, then I might be like, yeah, I probably shouldn't listen to, or I should listen to that fear and stay out of the water.
Yeah, and so much of the time, these signals, how I used to be, is these were very all or nothing. Like, I feel discomfort, that then means this isn't worth doing, we should avoid it. And that's where I guess it also is coming up for me just to normalize how this makes sense is to avoid things that are uncomfortable.
Mm,
That's why this is a
yeah.
skill and a practice, and why somebody like you who's been trained in this can help people walk through it again if it's meaningful for them. But to say this is kind of the default response, and it can really get in the way of things that matter to you. Yeah, that's just coming to
Mm,
my mind is this was such a pattern for me, and so learning this other way, super counterintuitive, but very powerful. And just like what you're saying, this is a practice. It's not one and done, and very flexible too. Like, it could be useful signal. Maybe it's getting in the way, but testing it out and seeing what's going to be useful for you. Right.
yeah. It's a really great point in that, um, like, of course, we would want to avoid things that are painful. Like, that's human nature.
Hmm.
And so to be able to, um, yeah, give ourselves some compassion in that, of like, yeah, this is going to be hard. And is there a reason why I would want to do this hard thing?
Yeah.
And absolutely, it takes so much practice. I've been doing this, oh gosh, I don't even know how many years now, like probably 15 years. And like, it's a daily practice that I do. It's not
Hmm.
something that I'm ever able to say, like, oh, I've got that one. Like, I am done. Don't need to work on that anymore. Like,
Yeah.
it's something that there's always growth that can happen there.